I've run more than 25,000 miles in the last 10 years and taken my own run from a 25-minute 5K to a sub-15-minute 5K. Been a part of the world elite in triathlon and trained dozens of runners in everything from training strategies to running form. And along the way, I've learned 4 things that are absolutely critical if you want to run fast and injury-free at any level. And most importantly, what you must avoid. And trust me, there's a lot. When I started training seriously in 2013, I ran my first 5K on a track in a time of 25 minutes and 13 seconds. While that is a great time for most people, I wanted to go to the Olympics in triathlon, and to do that, I had to run a sub 15-minute 5K coming off the bike. Now, being 6'3" and weighing about 180 pounds at the time, my fellow athletes, they thought I was insane. And the fact that I did not start running seriously until I was in my 20s did not help. But I wanted to prove them all wrong, and in my own mind I thought maybe it would take a year, maybe 2. But I was so wrong. You see, even though I started improving rapidly and I ran a sub 20-minute 5K in the first year, it would take me another 3 years to go below 15 minutes on a 5K. But in those 3 years, I learned something crucial about running. You see, when it finally happened and I ran a 14-minute and 43 seconds 5K, I did not see it as that big of a deal anymore. You see, the key lesson I learned is that even though having a goal like a sub 15-minute 5K is great and you should celebrate if you hit it, then if you want to become a great runner, having a specific goal is just not enough. In fact, multiple studies have shown that having an internal focus, like how you can improve yourself or improve a certain aspect of your technique, is way better, leads to better performances, better motivation over the long term, than having an external focus like a specific time or running a specific distance. That means that instead of chasing those specific times, I started to listen to that inner voice in my head that said, you can beat your old self. And once I did, I found like endless motivation, and I just wanted to go out and keep improving. It was like the best feeling in the world. But something was soon about to happen that I did not account for, and I wish I'd known about it sooner. It would have saved me from months of frustration. After a hard training session in 2016, I had a conversation with my trainer at the time. This guy was a performance specialist in the military, and he had been a world-class athlete himself. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We are pulling the plug." I could almost not hold my tears back, but I kept it together just to not lose face in front of him. You see, I felt that the last 6 months and 600 hours of training was a waste. Because for the next 2 weeks leading into the first race of the season, I was not allowed to train. I felt like I was gonna lose everything that I've worked so hard for. You see, in the weeks leading prior to this fateful training, I had experienced some knee pain. And on that exact day, it has gotten so bad that I could not run without significant pain. So we decided that it was time to take a break. And if I could go back in time, I would smack me in the face. Because as I've realized over the last 10 years, there are 2 things that are certain in life. You can never have enough running shoes, and you will get injured if you start running and training seriously. It's not a matter of if you'll get injured, that's like almost 100% certain at some point in your career, but it's about how you handle it when you get injured. And I wish I knew sooner that doing strength training and injury prevention are so crucial and something you must do also when there is no pain at all. Because it's a mistake that I made myself and I see so many people making. When the pain comes, they do everything. Mobility exercises, strength training, they even work on their technique. But as soon as the pain goes away, so does all that rehabilitation work, all the strength work, and they're just back to straight up running. So, 2 lessons here. 1, don't get too emotional about an injury. Just do the right things and know that you will get back to running just like you did before. And in the meantime, focus on all the other things that you can control, like your strength training, maybe even some cross training to keep your VO2 max high and keep everything going. 2, do preventive work. trust me, it's worth it. In fact, studies have shown that not only will it make you less likely to get an injury, it will also make you faster. If you don't do the next lesson, which is a trap that I don't think I've coached any runner who has not fallen into, including myself. Picture this. You've been training hard for months leading into a race, you've stayed consistent, and you avoided injuries. Everything is going according to plan. You've even done some great sessions, but as the race day approaches, you start to become a bit more anxious. Could you really run the pace that you want on race day? Is the time you set for yourself possible? Maybe you should just go out for a training run to see if it's actually possible to keep up with that race pace. I mean, one more hard training before race day couldn't hurt. It's basically the same as the race itself. Right. We've all been there, going out to see just how hard we can push before the race. But let me tell you this, every runner I've coached have ended up regretting it. In fact, it's so common that we've started calling it the hero session. But I'm here to tell you, this is the hero's kryptonite. What will end up happening is that because in the weeks prior to the race, you're probably at peak load already, then you're playing right on the edge of overtraining. And doing the hero session leads to one of two things in most cases. Either you end up doing a great session, but don't peak on race day because you messed up your entire cycle now. So you're going to become one of those runners that always tell everyone how great they are in training, but once race day arrives, they just can't ever seem to get a great time. And you don't want to be that guy. Or worse, you end up getting injured, either during your hero session or during your race. I wish I'd known sooner to just trust in the process and that consistency is king if you want to become a great runner. Studies suggest that following the so-called 10% rule is a great starting point to avoid overtraining and injuries. The 10% rule states that you'll do a maximum progression of 10% per week. If I can give you one piece of advice, it's to fight that inner voice that just screams at you to go out and try that race pace. That is what race days are for. If, of course, you've done the right things leading up to race day, which leads me to the next lesson. And if I had implemented this at the start of my running career, I would have become so much faster, so much sooner. When I first started running, I would base my training around experienced runners who were better than me and what they told me. And even though that got me a great start, it wasn't until I started using scientific research that my form just skyrocketed. Now, don't get me wrong, science is not the end-all, be-all, and you should not just follow science blindly and say, okay, science says this, so I'm also gonna do that. You have to use science as a starting point, and I think that it's the greatest starting point to start experimenting, and then you have to track your progress to see when you do this, what happens to my body? When I do that, what happens to my body? And then over time, you can discard the things that don't work for you and keep the things that do work, and all of a sudden you have a tailored training plan that just makes you better than everyone else. So to help you take advantage of what science has to offer, let me show you 4 key principles that separates elite or great runners from amateurs and recreational runners based on a 2022 meta-analysis. Of course, I'm also going to give you some actionable steps that you can take to start taking advantage of this knowledge. Feel free to pause and write down any of these concepts if you will. We're going to move fast.
Key number 1 is training periodization. Elite runners divide training into different phases with specific goals in each phase. To do the same, you can plan your training year with a base, build, and peak phase. Focus on building endurance first, then speed, and finally fine-tuning your performance before races.
But how should we train in each phase? According to the study, we should use key number 2, which is 2 different training methods.
Pyramidal training with a lot of low intensity training, some medium, and a little bit of high intensity. And polarized training, which is very high and very low intensity training with not much in between.
Both methods are effective in getting better, but in recent years, most elite athletes have turned to the polarized training and do more of that because it allows them to do overall more volume. Which leads me to key number 3, which is intensity distribution.
Over the entire season, elite runners often have an 80-20 split, where 80% of training is low intensity and 20% is high intensity. To take advantage of this yourself, track your workouts and ensure you spend most of your time training at a conversational pace, also known as zone 2 or just below the first lactate threshold. And in the last 20%, you should do VO2 max work or sprints.
The last key that separates elite runners from amateurs are training volume.
You see, of course, elite runners run a lot of miles, but they do it in a controlled, progressive way over many years. To do the same, gradually increase your weekly mileage over years to improve your endurance and avoid sudden increases to prevent injury like we discussed earlier.
I would like to add that if I should give 3 key lessons to my younger running self, it would be these. Consistency is key. Regular training, even if it's only like basic easy runs, is so much more important than you think. Listen to your body, adjust the training intensity and volume based on how you feel, and track everything to see what type of training you respond to the most. And finally, I would tell myself to start training the correct way to finally be able to run effortlessly like the people you envy. And to learn exactly how I did that, you should watch this video next.